The year is 1895. Thomas Edison is electrocuting elephants, while China and Japan play hot potato with Taiwan. In the first U.S. Open, Horace Rawlins outstrokes Willie Dunn, and Oscar Wilde sues the Marquis of Queensberry over accusations about who he'd been stroking. William G. Morgan invents the precursor to volleyball, and inadvertently ruins the stocks of teenaged boys for perpetuity. Grover Cleveland nods off in the Oval Office, while the U.S. Supreme Court legalizes military suppression of the Pullman strike. But all of that pales in comparison to the acts performed by 18 men and 1 woman in Hoboken's Bijou Theater that spring. This isn't going where you think. On April 15th, the strongwoman Minerva hoisted a platform loaded down with 1.5 dozen audience members in a stunt known as the Hip and Harness Lift. The National Police Gazette, a tabloid with a reputation for hyperbole, reported the combined weight to be 3,000 pounds, a number inflated in subsequent accounts. The publication awarded Minerva with a gold loving cup, which actually isn't a novelty toy that a sexually frustrated husband buys his ambivalent wife for her 43rd birthday. 32 years later, Rosetta Huffman bolstered Minerva's mark to 3,564 pounds in an article for Strength and Health magazine. The Guinness Book of World Records picked up Hoffman's report and awarded Minerva's performance the pointed distinction of the greatest weight ever lifted by a woman. That footnote stands as one of a pitiful few left behind regarding the mysterious muscle mommy. Minerva was born Josephine Schauer to 2 German immigrants, Joseph and Louisa. Joseph passed through Ellis Island in 1858, contradicting Josephine's later claims that she was born in Hamburg in 1865. The Guinness Book of World Records lists her date of birth as 1869, but we can take their claims with about as much salt as your hypertensive grandma is allowed by her overbearing physician. More certain is that Josephine grew up in a country groping for stability. The 1863 New York City draft riots were the largest urban disturbance in American history. Working-class Irish immigrants represented the most vocal and violent constituents, indignant over being drafted to fight for, as they saw it, the freedom of blacks who would compete with them for jobs. The rioters ransacked churches, children's homes, and the properties of prominent abolitionists. They were turned back at the Times office by staff members wielding Gatling guns, a scene straight out of a steampunk Western movie. The unrest drove many of Manhattan's black residents to relocate to Brooklyn. Abraham Lincoln diverted troops from the recently concluded Battle of Gettysburg to quell the protests. Incidentally, the New York-born Irishman Henry McCarty, better known as cockeyed gunslinger Billy the Kid, would have been 4 years old during the draft riots. Henry was a child of first-generation Irish immigrants, meaning his family would have been caught between rioters and the large Irish constituent of the police force. Now, I'm no Freudian psychologist, but I could definitely draw a roadmap from that childhood trauma right on through to Billy's frontier murder spree. We can also speculate that the aftermath of the riots drove the Schauers to relocate to New Jersey. The events of the Civil War cast a long shadow. Years after Lee bent the knee at Appomattox, urban centers remained as volatile as a potion botched by Neville Longbottom. Little is known about Josephine's development as a strength athlete, which I'm using as an opportunity to speculate ruthlessly. Take a moment to step into her humble clogs. Of 2 German laborers with a slippery grasp on the English language. Say that some ancient strand of ice giant DNA prompts you to hit puberty like conjugate chads hit the nose torque on max effort day. Like, all of a sudden you're a head taller than the boys making lewd metaphors about the bratwurst you bring for lunch. There's one kind of person who would respond by learning to make themselves smaller. they'd hunch like a CrossFitter about to fail a front squat, and make a mosaic of gum under the desk in the back of the room. Then there's the kind of person who starts using those boys as atlas stones. Josephine was the second kind of person, a 19th-century prototype for Layla Hormozi. She had the chutzpah not to give a hoot about the jokes of the fragilely masculine. She wanted to see what she could do. I'd venture so far as to say that performance was a way for her to support her passion for spitting in the face of gravity. Natural that she'd adopt the stage name of Minerva, patron of wisdom, justice, and victory. These seem to have been personal virtues of Josephine's. She had the wisdom to market her talent, the moral compass to know she deserved something better than the tipped-over porta potty that is the city of Hoboken, and the persistence to actualize blah 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 blah. This isn't a college admissions essay, you get it. Such pontifications bring us to Minerva's 1895 hip and harness lift, one of her few cameos in the written record. This movement is to the belt squat what Morgan's sport of mintonette became to volleyball. It's the same concept, sans perverted onlookers in skin-tight spandex. Minerva would have been standing on an elevated platform, straddling a hole that allowed the harness to run from her hips to the corners of the lower platform where the 18 men were standing. She'd have, hopefully, braced, planted her hands on her knees, and extended her legs until enough daylight was visible under the lower platform to convince her audience that she had lifted it. Voila! Golden loving cup achieved. By this time, Josephine had divorced the pencil-necked Christian Walford and husbanded up the strongman Charles Blatt. The two spent a decade-long honeymoon performing traveling feats of strength across Mexico, a nomadic romance that would make any van life Instagrammer swoon behind the wheel of their VW. Like Doug Hepburn and Eric Bugenhagen after her, Josephine ultimately segued her strength into a professional wrestling contract. She competed against all genders. Many consider her America's first female wrestling champion. She lost the title to Alice Williams, who was beaten out in 1901 by Laura Bennett, not the triathlete. In spite of persistent and pernicious challenges, Josephine couldn't provoke Bennett to agree to a match. With her competition growing too slippery to effectively suplex, Josephine, by then remarried to Henry Burkall, retired from competition just before the U.S. entered the First World War. This decision likely spared her from being spun into Woodrow's propaganda machine and spat out as the precursor to Rosie the Riveter. Josephine was the mother to 4 children who would have driven DYEL pencil necks to tears over the injustices of genetics. She spent the final years of her life building a real estate empire across New Jersey. Minerva was the patron goddess of muscle mommies, so singular in her time that one name was enough. Much like that great uncle of yours who would have played for the Falcons if he just hadn't picked up his 3rd felony, her legacy has been left to corrode from history. The pessimist in me attributes this to the fact that she was a contemporary of strongmen such as Arthur Saxon and Eugene Sandow, who got a lot more coverage from journalists uncomfortable with a woman who could out-squat them, or literally just squat them. My next episode of Strength Stories was going to cover the Icelandic strongman John Paul Sigmarsson, but Big Laws beat me to the punch with a 17-minute biography of the original deadlift daddy. That sets a high bar for me to squat under, so I've chosen to cover the history of the Husafell stones while I wait for the pre-workout to kick in. Thanks for watching. If you've got topic requests, I'd love to hear them below. In the words of the immortal Miyamoto Musashi, seek nothing outside yourself, except a like, a subscribe, and a comment.